This is Georgina Rose.
This is Nike.
And this is Anthony.
And welcome to Magnolias and Magic. In this episode, we're going to be talking about what we wish we knew before we entered the practice. I know online Nike and I have sort of discussed this a little bit, but we thought it'd be useful to have a communal discussion. When you're becoming a seeker or getting into the occult, there's a lot that you don't know. We go through this phase where we think we know a lot, but we don't know much at all. It's sort of like a process, right? You start with I know nothing, you start with I know nothing, then you go to I know a lot, I'm an expert on the occult, and then you realize you don't know shit, and then you sort of start actually learning in a very Dunning-Kruger fashion. So we want to talk about things that we learned. We're going to be discussing everything from personal revelations to truths about the community, to some of our opinions we've developed and how our beliefs have shifted, things we've got wrong over the years, and everything about what we wish we could tell younger versions of ourselves. And we sort of, when we think back on the things we used to think, sort of like slap each other. We sort of like cringe and we're like, oh God, how did I ever think that? How did I ever think that was correct? Why did I even say that? And we're going to be talking about all of that and all the things that we wish we could travel back in time and tell our younger selves. So let's break into it.
I mean, the biggest obvious shift I would have is that I wish I knew that Norse paganism would be more important to me as time went on, because for a long time my practice was almost entirely Hellenist. It was very eclectic, but the gods that I worked with were all Greek, and every pantheon's going to speak to people differently, or in particular gods are going to speak to people differently. And I've found that my experience with the Norse gods and the Norse pantheon in general has been much, I would call it, louder than my experience with the Hellenic pantheon. And for some people, it's the opposite. They struggle to connect with the Norse gods and do better with the Hellenic or somebody else. So I wish I would have known that it really just resonated with me and to get into it sooner, because so much of the Norse stuff just suits who I am as a person. Especially like going through the Havamal and reading those verses and stuff. Everything just, it makes so much sense. It's really lovely. So I not that I feel like I wasted time, because all of it was valuable, but there is always that part of you that feels like you've missed out on some time a little bit by not getting here first, but it's all part of the journey.
Oh, same. I mean, early me is nothing like what I believe now. I think one of the big traps related to this is that I wanted to like label my practice really early on. I wanted to have like a category, a paradigm, a framework, because I think as people, we sort of crave identity, we crave structure. And when you enter spirituality, there's not much structure, right? You're very much told to think for yourself. It's a very individualist model of religion. And even though we sort of claim we want that, we always want like a label. We want a paradigm to follow. And for me, like I was trying to label my practice really early on. I was like, I want to be a Appalachian folk witch. I want to be a traditional sabbatic, whatever. And I went through a series of time where my practice wasn't really changing, but I was like flipping through these labels, searching for this sort of identity. And it would take me, I would not be a Thelemite the first year that I was a practitioner, because I just wasn't even open to the idea, because I was too stuck on like finding my niche, finding my space, that I didn't even like try to read things that were outside of that perspective, right? Like I wanted to find my spot, and so I wouldn't even really consider ideas that were outside. And what I needed to do was to be okay with being unlabeled, be okay with not having a paradigm for a substantial amount of time. And when it came to Thelema, I was studying Thelema before I became a Thelemite, and I'm really grateful that I actually did that, instead of just like grabbing onto the label and sort of using it as a thing that locked myself down. Because realistically, whatever it is you find first, like whatever paradigm you're first introduced to, for me it was the Appalachian stuff, that's probably not going to be what you end up committing your practice to. Like, a lot of people start with Wicca, right? A lot of those people are not Wiccans 6 months later. You should be okay with whatever you see first, or even within the first few years, possibly shifting out of and changing out of, and then finding your personal path. Because it's very likely, and this isn't true for everyone, that what you encounter early on won't be your permanent path, and that's okay. And so I think we need to be I think we need to get comfortable with being in that liminal state of being a seeker, being looking for answers, looking for things, instead of just wanting to immediately jump into a community that gives us an answer.
Yeah, and I think for me a bit because I was very much the same way. I didn't find my way into Hecate and witchcraft or any of the other things that would stick long term for at least like the first 3 or 4 years that I practiced because I started really young. And I think for me a big part of it was like you said, like trying to cling on to labels. Like I went from being raised in like very traditionalist Catholicism into like this little exploratory pagan spirituality that I started developing for myself, and so like leaving like that strict ordered religion and then moving into something as free formed and independent as paganism and like esoteric spirituality, like it left I didn't know it at the time, but like looking back I can recognize it left a lot of room for me to like want to, like you said, grab onto labels, try to grab onto like any form of like order, like religious schematic that I could, and it ended up just locking me into a lot of positions that like didn't really fit just because I found them before anything else. And I think for me the biggest part was like you said, trying to be comfortable in that liminal space of like seeking. And then there was another dimension too, kind of like how Nike said, of like needing to learn how to trust myself and like know like what, like subconsciously I knew what I was looking for and I knew what type of spirituality would fill that. I just wasn't ready to accept that on like a conscious level yet. And so it was just learning to build that trust in myself. And like it's funny, like when I first started, like I think I've talked about this before, like when I first started practicing, the first type of like pagan spirituality I found was Wicca. And so like one of the first things I did was like immediately tried to find a deity that I could like latch onto and work with. And when I was doing that, I actually found Hecate. Like she was the first one that came up in my search. And like I remember looking at her like Wikipedia page and reading it. I was like, oh my god, this is so cool. This is vibing with like everything that I'm looking for. And then I'm like, nope, yep, that's too mainstream. That's too weird. Like that's too overplayed. And so I was like, nope, that can't be it. And so I put her aside. And 4 years later she came back. But like, yeah, it's just for me, it was really about learning to trust myself and learning to trust that I knew what was best for me in the end.
Well, the patron thing is something that I think a lot of people have really hyped up on social media. In
Yeah,
Thelema, you don't really see the term patron used much. It seems to be very much a, I don't know, it's kind of common in the eclectic neo pagan sphere. And
exactly.
people, I think this really does come from eclectic Wicca in particular, because in traditional Wicca, you're told a god and goddess, more or less, though certain covens do deviate from that. And then when a Wicca went eclectic, people took the god and goddess idea and started applying it to a bunch of different gods. And so this neo pagan concept of the patron and the matron became really popular. And the matron thing's kind of been dropped. It's just kind of now become a singular patron or two patrons that everyone
Hmm.
has to find, and they're like, oh, I need to look for these signs, I need to look for these things. And I think people really rush into that and don't realize that calling a deity your patron is essentially like getting married spiritually.
Exactly.
Like
Yep.
you want to date around, you want to court, you want to get to know a ton of deities before saying that you're going to devote your life, because it's essentially what a patron relationship is, to a specific deity. That's not something to be done lightly. I think because people see it on like TikTok, they're like, I have like 10 patrons or whatever. They think they need to immediately commit,
Hmm.
and they sort of rush that natural process. Whereas in antiquity, in previous times, people would have just it would have just happened naturally, and people wouldn't have like rushed that to the same level. People are like committing to patrons before they even can do invocation or evocation at this point, which
Well,
is
Yeah.
not good.
historically, it was less that they worked with one necessarily. Like they might have had one that they were more focused on. If we go with the Norse stuff, I mean, Thor was the god of the common people, and in some places was more worshipped than Odin. But you would at least do something sometimes, depending on your needs, for different gods in the pantheon. So if you needed justice, maybe you'd go to Tyr. Wisdom, you'd go to Odin. Love, maybe you'd go to Freya. You know, you'd have these different things, even if you worked with Thor the most because you were what most people were, which is a farmer,
Hmm.
or you need protection or whatever, he's the god of the common people. It doesn't mean that you don't touch Odin at all. You don't touch Freya at all. There's still part of that. And so I think it's interesting that there has been such a big community shift. I do agree. I think it's in part because of Wicca and some latent Christianity, to be honest.
Yeah.
This drive to find one specific god. And I'm glad that I sort of was able to miss that one. So that's one that I don't really feel like I have to tell my past self,
Oh,
like, good
that's
job,
awesome.
you did it, good. Because I mean, I've always been like, I don't want to say anti-authority, but I hesitate to jump into you're the only one. I can only listen to you because it's not what I like. So
Mm-hmm.
I definitely allowed myself to stay open, although I also stayed away from deity work longer than maybe I wish I would have. But I mean, there's a lot that just it happened the way it happened, and I don't really regret the path that I took to get there.
The
Mm-hmm.
anti-authority
Exactly.
streak in modern witchcraft is really weird to me because yeah, it's like anti-authority in that it sort of counters the mainstream narrative or whatever, but people aren't really anti-authority. What they are is they conform to non-conformity. They're like, I'm not a Christian, and they go into this conformist path. They believe the witch talk Vatican. They just replicate what exists in the macrocosm. It's essentially just conforming to being a non-conformist, but you're not really subverting anything, you're not really transgressing anything, you're just following a new trope. And the trope is the idea of opposing the status quo by just adopting a new status quo. You see this across the occult. And I think a lot of these discussions sort of come back to that because people are like, I'm not like the Christians, but I'm going to listen to the pagan Vatican blindly and sort of commit to nonconformity in a very sort of ironic way to where can you even describe it as anti-authority? It's just submitting to a less powerful new authority.
Well, speaking of nonconformity, that's one thing that I don't know that I would necessarily phrase it as what I wish I would know, but I wish I would have experimented with it sooner. It was gender stuff and being gender nonconforming and being non-binary and all that. Part of that journey to figure that out and be comfortable with it was, as Anthony and I have talked about before, my journey with Aphrodite, where when I was working with her, the themes that she would emphasize in my divination with her was a lot of like masculinity and authority, which is not what I thought it would be. I kind of naively expected she would help me open up to my feminine side, and she was like, "No, be handsome. What are you talking about? No, absolutely not. No, you why? Why would you need to?" And it was like finding the beauty within myself with masculine themes, which also then helped me feel more comfortable on my feminine days. So I knew that I could have back and forth, and I sort of started to curate my style and things because of my pagan work essentially. So I wish I would have known that it was okay to explore that stuff and that I didn't have to conform so much even as old as I was at that time.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. That's so beautiful to hear. And like I kind of have like a similar vein in that too of like I wish I would have known, like it's like you said, it's not like I wish I would have known, but like I wish I just would have like internalized this a little quicker of like it's okay to like let the craft like be how am I trying to say this? Let the craft be a vehicle for like self-exploration in that way
Yes.
and like
Well, it should.
self-acceptance.
What's the point of
Exactly.
magic without change? The entire point of magic, as defined by Aleister Crowley, is using the will to enact change in the world. If magic does not result in change, why are you doing it? If you don't want to change, you should not be in the occult because the entire point, there are 2 points sort of that the occult boils down to. Change and finding closeness to divinity. Those are sort of the two things that happen when you do these rituals. You either get closer to spirits, closer to a spirit, or change happens in the material world in some form. If you're not willing to have your previous ideas about yourself, your previous ideas about where you fit into the world, things in your life shattered and rebuilt into a better form that is who you are meant to be, I don't know what you're doing with magic. Because if magic isn't changing you, what is it? What is it? Because what magic is, it's the alchemical transmutation of the self into whether you want to call it the higher self, the perfected self, the true will, whatever term you like. There are a lot of different ones across cultures and practices, but magic should make change.
Phrase it in a different way too, that like I wish that had been made clearer, or like maybe I just read shitty books, but like I wish that had been clearer earlier in my practice, is that like aside from all of like the materialistic parts of witchcraft and like being able to use it to manifest your desires, like I wish it had been more emphasized, or I had internalized more quickly, that it was for like breaking down and rebuilding yourself, like in a lot of ways. And I totally missed that point for like 5 or 6 years. And then like I said, like I went through a similar thing. It was actually it wasn't Aphrodite, it was with Venus, but same current, similar current. But I went through a similar thing that Nike did where I was struggling a lot with like my sexuality and like being able to present as like more masculine, because like like I said, my family was very conservative, and like I went to Venus with the intention of like, hey, can you help me like fix my masculinity so I can be like a normal person and not always be like at odds with my family and with
Oh yeah, I'll
society.
fix it all right.
And
I'll make you more feminine. That's what
that's
I'll
like
do.
that's exactly. I learned how to use makeup during that part of my life. So exactly, yeah, and that's what it ultimately boiled down to. Was like it wasn't so much like she fulfilled my desire; it was that she broke down my ego so that I had a different perspective by the end.
And that's good. That's a
Mm-hmm.
good thing. We need to look,
Exactly.
our egos sometimes needs a little bit of a break. Needs
Mm-hmm.
to sometimes you gotta just take someone's framework and sense of self, just blow that shit up. Like just crush it. Shatter it, like throw a rock at it. That's kind of what you need to do most of the time.
Exactly.
Well,
But
there's so much empowerment in being able to do that too. Like I've
Yes.
never really liked the empowerment witchcraft stuff in the terms of the becoming a hashtag girl boss kind of empowerment. Like that is not really what I've ever gravitated towards, but it's more empowerment as in confidence in self and a feeling of control over your own life, which I think that
Yes.
witchcraft often brings, or the occult in general. I know that for
Mm-hmm.
me, like I just redid my money bowl today. I'm so proud of myself. I did it. Um,
Yay.
and so I
yay.
feel like I have more control over where my life is going, what I'm doing, and through various forms of divination, tarot, runes, astrology, because astrology is divination, I feel like I can prepare myself for outcomes as they are gearing up to happen. I can set myself up for success with more foreknowledge than I would have had without. I could get along fine enough, and I did for so long, but I've definitely seen the results of being able to have that foreknowledge, to be able to have a warning that, hey, this is coming, just get ready for it, make sure you have the resources ready. So if I know that it's going to be a difficult physical health time or mental health time, or if career is going to be the focus, I can see some of those things coming, and I feel empowered by the ability to take the reins. Or if I see unfavorable circumstances coming, I can maybe do magical workings to mitigate that. Or if I have a need, like a financial need, I can do workings to help mitigate some of the difficulties in those situations. It brings that empowerment of control, and I like that.
Yeah,
Exactly.
which empowerment's a weird term. I have a lot of thoughts about it. As a whole, off even outside of the occult way it intersects with it. But yeah, I mean, it's going to change you. That's good. I think this also connects to what you guys were saying with divination and what you were saying about books. I think books sometimes don't always prepare people for what magic is actually like and how it actually manifests in the real world. And to an extent, I don't really know how they can perfectly prepare you because the experiences are so personal. But they really, I don't think people really realize how divination and magic works until they actually do it. Like, you can understand the metaphysics of it, the theology of it really, really well. But the way that it actually manifests in the material world always
It's
is
a head
something that I
trip.
think people aren't really they don't really have a logistical understanding of. Like with divination, people like think when you say divination that you're going to be able to tell them the name of the person they'll marry, whether their cat's going to get hit by a car, all these very specific things. And then when they actually try divination, they realize that one, all the divination forms feel differently. Like what you get from astrology and what you get from tarot are very, very different.
Yep. Yep.
But it's not even that rigid. And when it comes to like spirits, people, because they watch TikToks, think that you're going to be able to like chat with your deity and take them to Starbucks like they're some sort of pet.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're like, wait, no, a deity is something that you don't even experience as tangibly as you would think. They're signs, they're symbols. It's like more a hum in the air. Then with manifestation, I mean, that's like those don't always manifest how you think they will. You're not gonna, if you say give me money, wake up in a bed full of $100 bills. Like it's much more subtle. It's much more liminal. And even if books try to give you an accurate perception, or even if this podcast, I mean, I try to give my own perspectives, it's hard to even describe this stuff in exactly how it actually feels when you experience it.
Yep.
As well, sometimes results are not necessarily what you want. And when people think, oh, I didn't get what I want, oh, it backfired, people think the worst. They think, like, let's say you did a money spell, you end up, like, impoverished and in a ditch, and now you have to do, like, welfare or whatever. Typically, it doesn't even backfire like that. It backfires in weird ways, like something goes slightly wrong, or it goes too correct, and then you're overwhelmed. Like, It's very hard for people before they practice to gauge what this stuff is actually like when you're
Mm-hmm.
experiencing it.
I could give an example if you want me to.
Please,
Yes.
yes.
So I like to do divination before I do spell work as like a hint as to how it might go, and I did that today with the Money Bowl. So before the Jupiter hour came during the Saturn hour that preceded it, I did some runes about it just to be like, how's this going? So obviously I'm moving soon. And the basic themes of some of the runes that I pulled were power. One was a god. It's a rune that's associated with Odin.
Ooh.
Um, wealth, but like wealth that you have to tend to. Justice, balance, protection. One is torch, which in some interpretations is like controlled fire. It could be like the spark that you share with others, or the ability to like pass that on, like a physical torch versus a wildfire. And one was ancestral property, which is,
Really?
yeah, so it's really interesting. And so putting it all together, like if you just had those in front of you, it would be hard to tell. But doing it for myself, it made a lot of sense because there's like power and having things be in my control and wealth and ancestral property in particular. It all read to me like you're going to be able to have the resources available to you through this to be able to get a place that is a long-term living situation, because it's not just a house you live in, it's your ancestral home. It's like the house
Yep.
that is passed down to you from your parents. So
That's
it's
the
like a
vibe I got
long
from it
term.
too. That's
Yeah, so
awesome.
so to me it was like doing that. And if I was doing a divinatory reading on it, the expectation you might get if you just read in books and hadn't ever done it before would be, it'll say it goes good and you get money or whatever. And it's like, no, this got real specific and was like, money for ancestral home, you are protected, your god is with you. And I was like, ah, it's
Mm-hmm.
wild. And I definitely wouldn't have expected to have those experiences when I came into it, because I was agnostic when I started witchcraft. I didn't really know what to believe because I hadn't had those experiences. So I, like, Norse stuff aside, just generally, more broadly, I do wish I would have known that I would have called myself religious for the first time, like officially, because that's really strange for me.
Is it real? Were you not raised like with a lot of
No, I
religion?
was not raised with religion. Gotta start
Yeah,
that
you
over.
were raised atheistically, right?
It's not that I was raised atheistically. I was raised agnostically, but just without religion. Like my dad tried to
Yeah.
take me once or twice, but I didn't care. My grandma took us when we were too small to leave alone. Like it wasn't I'm bringing the kids to church. It's I'm going to church and the kids are with me, so they have to be with
Really?
me. But once
Mm-hmm.
we were old enough, she knew we didn't care because my mom didn't care. Like it
Yeah.
was never a thing that she forced. So yeah, we grew up without religion, and then I was either atheist or agnostic, or even to the point of semi-anti-theism. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so this is
Hilarious.
the first time I would openly call myself religious with pride.
Wow.
Well,
That's
my
such a
views have changed
transformation.
so much. Look, this is maybe a spicy take. I'm gonna offend some people with this one.
I'm ready. Let's go.
Ooh.
If you are truly a dissident thinker who questions things, has critical thought, and questions what they believe, your views will change over the course of your life. And you need to be okay with letting go
Mm-hmm.
of past ideas. It is very possible that in a year you may not recognize your past self. And that's a good thing. That means you're changing. That means you're growing. I can't even imagine being someone who was told what to believe when they're younger, never questioned it, and was that denomination my entire life from birth to death. Can't imagine that. I've changed my beliefs so much that it's almost funny. Like I talked to people from a few years ago and they're like, "You are unrecognizable." And I'm like,
Good.
"Good. Good. That's a good thing. I like that." But yeah, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you need to be okay with your beliefs changing. I think
Yep.
some people get really hung up on certain labels. Like I know a lot of people are really scared of the word religious,
Mm-hmm.
for a few reasons. One, a lot of people don't know what the definition of the word religion means because religion is actually not a very specific definition. Two, they have some form of religious trauma, which is sadly quite common in our community. Or three, the whole thing just scares them. And I think you need to be okay with sort of embracing that fear a little bit and being okay with taking on a label that in the past you may have seen as antagonistic to where you stand.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And on that same vein, for me personally, I wish I would have been okay with leaving old labels behind sooner, because like that, like we talked about it a little bit earlier, but like it traps you in this mentality of like you're not allowed to change, basically, like you're getting at. And like for me personally, there was a lot of periods, especially early on, where like I was an eclectic I identified as an eclectic back then, and so I was exploring a bunch of different traditions. And like there were points where there was a while where I studied Santeria because I was looking into like my ancestral heritage, and I was
Yeah.
studying that very heavily for like 3 or 4 months. And there came a point where like it just wasn't working anymore. Like it wasn't flowing, the current wasn't accessible to me. I now know it's because like it's an initiatory tradition, and like you have to commit to it in order to practice it. But like back then I didn't realize that, and I spent a lot of time just thinking like I would like there was something wrong with me, like I wasn't approaching it correctly, or I was doing it wrong, or that I just didn't have enough information or whatever. And it just held me into this spot where like my spirituality stagnated. I started getting really like self-deprecating. I started hating my practice more than enjoying it, and like it took forever to get past that. So like you're on that same vein as you. I wish I would have been okay with leaving those constrictive labels behind sooner.
Oh yeah, certain traditions and certain spirits, this is something that I don't see people talk about ever, will reject you. And I
Yes.
don't mean in the literal sense of like you go and you join a coven and they say no to you. I mean on a spiritual level.
Yeah, you just
There's
can't connect.
yeah, no, there was this one spirit, I'm not going to name them, that I really wanted to develop a relationship with. I put a lot of work into this relationship. I read a lot of books. I was praying like every day to this specific spirit. They didn't want to talk to me.
Yeah.
It wasn't that they didn't listen, it's that they like rejected me. They were like, "Get out of my lawn, girl." Like
Mm-hmm.
I literally got like negative symbols. Like they were a solar adjacent spirit and I started getting sunburns.
Oh no.
Yeah,
Right.
like it was not even like subtle. They were a solar god and they're like, "We're going to give you sunburns. You're going to like have terrible skin when you're out in the sun too long." Like it was pretty aggressive. Like this spirit was like not picking up on my vibes. They were like, "Leave me alone." And then
Yeah.
when I left them alone, a bunch of synchronicities started happening. They were like, "Thank God she's gone."
They sent you a
Exactly.
thank you for leaving basket.
Yeah.
Yeah, they gave me a departing gift. Like not every spirit and practice is gonna. It's not even sometimes that you like, because I fully believe you can like choose a lot of things. You can choose what tradition you want to follow, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But the tradition doesn't always have to choose you back. You know, like I talk
Exactly.
a lot about my very happy spiritual relationship with Saturn, and that always went great. This solar spirit, no.
Opposite.
And I really wanted to make it work, but I could not pick up the memo. Just like human relationships, and I don't like. Look, I really don't like when people humanize spirits because I think that it causes a lot of problems with people. Like, I think that it kind of messes up people's understandings. But spirits can reject you. They're not all going to
Mm-hmm.
like you. Not all traditions on the spiritual level are going to welcome you. And this doesn't even really have to do with cultures or anything. It's just like certain spirits are not going to vibe with you, certain ones will.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of just have to accept that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I wish I would have known? That, and I touched on it a little bit earlier, but some spirits are very quiet compared to other people working with the same spirit. And
Yes.
there's nothing wrong with like what you're doing. It's just that your relationship with them is going to be different. And like, yes, this should be obvious. But for some people, certain gods are so loud and they're frequent and they're always around and they're constantly sending them this or that thing. And trying to work with that same spirit, it's like they come around. What Hecate is the one for me. Comes around like once a month, once every 2 months, fades away with time. I think as of now, she's pretty much good to just be on her way. I don't know if she'll pop in again, but like for me, she was often very quiet and only came when she needed to. Versus with other people I know, she's all the time, constantly sending them the dreams, constantly talking to them, always synchronicities, like very, very,
Yep.
very strong work. And it's hard not to feel a little bit disheartened when you see somebody else having this frequent relationship and you start feeling like you're doing something wrong. But I wish it was a little bit more frequently talked about that some people just have a much quieter relationship.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny that you bring up the Hecate specifically, because that's exactly what I was thinking of when you were talking. Because just as an example, back when I finally start working with her, I had a friend who we both practiced together and we like studied together. We were like a little reading group basically, and we stopped interacting for like 6 months or so, and then when we came back together, his practice and like the way that he worked with Hecate was completely different than how I had developed. And it was at a point where, like you said, like I was working with her almost every single day, to the point where like it was hard to tune her out of my head. And where versus my friend, he was exactly like what you're saying. Like she would show up maybe once every month or once every 2 months, or like he adopted this belief where like she would only be there like during regular astrological intervals. And so like he
Oh.
would only see her at specific times during the year. And he adopted this as like canon, like this is how you work with Hecate. And it caused like some conflict between us, because we didn't believe like we were working correctly. Like we believed the other one was doing something wrong, basically. And we both came to an understanding years later that it wasn't that either of us was doing anything wrong or different or anything like that. It was just more so that she had different things to offer me versus what she was offering him, and those required two completely different like schematics of like how she would approach us. And like to tie it back to like what Georgina was saying, when spirits don't necessarily always want to work with you, I think that is how I have rationalized that in my head. Is when you work with a deity or when you work with a spirit, you're both trying to accomplish an objective. And sometimes like if you go to a spirit or a deity and they don't want to work with you, they might already know that they're not the one who can offer you what you need. Or like when you go to a deity and they work with you differently than someone else, like maybe they're trying to offer you something different than what that person is being offered.
Oh yeah, I mean, even if you do the exact same ritual, let's talk about the LBRP. Good old classic lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, the rocking chair of the occult. Classic, good, always very based. I've seen in person and online, over video chat, in person, in the same room, at rituals, a lot of different people perform the LBRP. Every person doing the LBRP is doing the same ritual, right? It's pretty simple. But
Mm-hmm.
every single person I've seen does it a little bit differently. Like you'll see the way that their arms move is a little different. Like my arms move very fluidly. The way that they vibrate sounds really differently. Some people sound like they're singing, other people sound like they're doing like the stereotypical yoga thing. You know what I mean? Where it's like really guttural and almost kind
Yep.
of sounds orgasmic.
They say
Yeah,
it with their chest.
yeah, like even that, like you see these differences, and the energy sometimes feels just a little bit different depending on who's doing it, depending on the space that it's in. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've had seen it in multiple parts of the country. Like it feels a little different. Even if you're doing literally the exact same ritual, the LBRP, it's a little bit different person to person, which I think is such a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree. I see that all the time, especially in Hecatean practice, because like there's not like a lot of like codified techniques or traditions within that like umbrella term. And so like everyone, like it's like the same flavor of witchcraft, but like everyone kind of approaches it a little bit differently. But like we all get results, so like obviously we're doing something right.
I think it's spirituality is personal.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I think it's good to see how different everyone's experiences are. I think it's a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys think that it would be as big and important in your life, like as a focus, as it is currently? And I mean, like taking up so much of your time, so much of maybe even your personality. Like, I never expected it to be so big. Like, I came in with the expectation that it was just going to be some small thing I add to my life. It's very casual, you know, whatever. I meditate sometimes. And I had no clue that it was going to be basically every facet of my life.
Mm-hmm.
The people I meet, the people I'm friends with, the places I go, the opportunities that are available to me, the things that I'm doing online, what I start telling people, what I might end up being able to do for a job. Like
Yep.
I never would have guessed I'd be here.
I mean, I think for me, like when I first started practicing, I was very entrenched in like like I said, it was a lot of like the Wiccan, like neo Wiccan, like eclectic Wicca type reading that I did. And so like a big thing that was emphasized back then was like staying in the broom closet and like stay secret, stay silent about your craft and stuff like that. And so I was very comfortable with the idea of like, I knew I wanted to do this and I knew I wanted to like throw myself into it, but I was okay with keeping it as like a quarantined part of my life. Like I knew that like this is who I was, but I was ready to keep that completely separate from like my schooling or my job or my friends or my family or anything like that. And I was fine with that. But like I think like you're saying, like the older I got, it was a little startling, just like how it crept into all of the other parts of my life to the point like where I am here today. Like it literally consumes almost every second of my day at this point. And it's not that like it's not like an obsession. It's that I've had to work spiritual aspects or like spiritual how do I want to say this? Like basically I just had to work a spiritual perspective into like everything I do in life now.
Yeah, I had no clue. I thought I was just gonna keep it to myself and tell
Mhm.
nobody and like turn the books so you can't even see the spines.
Yep.
And
I
that
did
didn't
that too.
happen. That definitely did not happen. Oh my god. If you even come to my apartment at this point, you kind of have to know I'm an occultist or it's really
Yep.
jarring. Like I can't even like have friends over for like a dinner party without having to have a talk beforehand because my entire apartment looks like some occult reading room. Like
Yes.
I it's or I can just redecorate really fast, which I guess is an option, but like it takes up
Mhm.
so much of my time. I don't even know. I had no clue. If you would have told me that like I would be where I am now, I would have laughed at you, to be completely honest. Like this is
Mhm.
not how I expected the trajectory to go.
Hmm. I think something, I don't know if this relates completely to what we're talking about, but something that just like surprises me to this day right now is like how big the community itself turned out to be, like in the real world, and like how big of a part I get to play in that, like as an adult. Because like growing up, all the authors were just kind of like celebrities who like I didn't know what any of them looked like. I didn't know who they were. They were just like these famous names that appeared in like Borders and Barnes and Nobles all the time. But like nowadays, like they're real people, like they're on the internet, they're accessible, like I regularly talk to them on the daily. And it's not just that like I'm a content creator, because like I'm barely a content creator. Like any regular person in the community nowadays could make a Twitter account and interact with everyone in the community.
Yeah, I had like one occult friend, and I went to like group stuff sometimes, but I did not realize how many friends and people I would bring into my life, like all you guys. And some of these
Hmm.
people in the community have really been there for me when I really needed it. So it's crazy, all that
It,
has happened.
it's weird to have people in my house from the internet that I met through Witchcraft. That's
It's so
wild to me.
weird.
It's weird. Like Olivia coming here, you coming here. So strange. So
Oh my god,
weird.
nothing is weirder than knowing someone through the internet and seeing them in person for the first time. I remember when I got off the plane and I saw Temp, I was like, what is happening? Is this some sort of like dimensional merge? What's going on?
Olivia
Like,
showing up at my apartment, and I like you get this idea in your head, like physically it's just a different experience. Like you know what they look like. You've seen their entire
but you don't
body.
really know.
Yeah, like the
Hmm.
physical experience of seeing them and meeting them, it's so strange. I had
Everyone
to
says I'm
like
short. Everyone says they didn't think I'd be so short.
Olivia and I had to do this thing where it was like we'd been close friends for a while. You know, she's at my house. Obviously, we have to be close for that. Um, but we had to break that barrier of like it sounds weird, but like, can I touch you? Like, just touching hands. Like, can I physically
Just
interact
like
with you?
exchange some energy for a
Yeah, just
second. Yeah.
because there's like that weird boundary of like we have never been physically near each other, and so we
It's
had to
so
get
weird.
it's very
It's like you're
strange.
reconciling like her egregore with like the actual
Yes,
Olivia. That's
yes,
fucking hilarious.
yeah, shit's wild.
Something that I wish also that I had known before getting into the community was like I had a lot of preconceived notions about what it meant to be a witch or like what it meant to be an occultist, and like those were based on like 2 or 3 books that I read when I was 14. And like as I've grown up, I've realized the community is a lot bigger and more diverse than I thought it was. Like there are magical traditions from almost every culture all over the world, all throughout history. Like there are living traditions that still exist today that have nothing to do with the broader occult community, like at least online. Like it's way bigger. Like I said, it's way bigger and more diverse than I thought it was. And I wish I would have had that information going into it, because I probably wouldn't have been so closed-minded to certain practices for one, and I probably also wouldn't probably have offended some people that I offended on the internet in the early days. So yeah, and then a billion other reasons besides that.
Yeah, I've learned so much from indigenous communities and more broadly BIPOC practitioners about
Mm-hmm.
the things that they've experienced, just their practices in general, a lot of the ancestral heritage and histories. And I'm not talking about like learning their practice, but learning about their practice, like learning about them, their practice, their heritage, their community,
Yeah.
learning about the effect that the larger occult community still has on them, the ways that they interact with us, the ways that we have been influenced by them and their traditions. It's been very eye-opening in the last few years, because I've always tried to keep an open mind to that, but obviously you can only have so much information when you grow up in a position of privilege. So it's
Hmm.
been um it's been nice. I don't know a better word for it. It's been very nice to be able to learn that stuff, and to just set aside the ego and try to just let everybody else who needs to speak. I don't want to speak over them. I just want to learn, and it's been nice to just sit in that position and to learn, not
Hmm.
to learn to use. You know what I mean? Like learning for the sake of understanding.
Well, nothing
Yeah.
exists in isolation. That's a ridiculous idea. No tradition has developed alone with no influences from outside of it.
Hmm.
Right? Like that's where we get this huge misinterpretation that like paganism is the opposite of Christianity, when
Yeah.
historically
Just
that's
like this big
complete.
monolith.
No, no, it's not. All these things influenced each other because people talk to each other. People take inspiration from each other. People teach each other.
Hmm.
So none of this developed in isolation. Like a lot of modern paganism really stems from Hermeticism, which is actually historically more tied to Abrahamicism than it is what the ancient pagans were up to.
Yeah.
And this idea that there's some sort of unbroken lineage is a big thing that people get wrong. They
Hmm.
think they're like literally doing what the people in the past did. Not that that would even be better. I think something that a lot of people have trouble getting over is the fact that just because people did it a long time ago does not mean it's true.
Hmm.
Just because a practice is older doesn't make it better. That's something that a lot of people have trouble swallowing. They think if it's new, it's bad. And I think that tradition has a lot of value. I think there's a lot of value in heritage, tradition, the past. But like, if we don't merge this idea with modernity and accept that there could be new ideas any second, there could be a new prophet, there could be a new tradition, we'd still be
Hmm.
shitting in a hole.
True.
Wait,
Well,
you
look,
don't?
look, you
No.
can take the runes from the past, but we're not returning to shitting in holes, guys. You don't need to just like perfectly recreate everything the ancient peoples did. That does not make it perfect gnosis.
Well, look,
No.
I'll be honest. I never would have expected that I would be more pleased with a reconstructionist viewpoint rather than an unbroken lineage. I almost
Hmm.
would rather that, because we can see that in some ways, and we're not going to get super into it. But with a lot of Christianity and the things that people hold on to from the scriptures from way back, if it was something that we would have to reconstruct, it would be approached very differently than what it is now, where people are clinging to ideas that are 2,000 years old. Not every
Hmm.
2,000-year-old idea needs to be clung to.
Hmm.
Just go put it out there. Yeah, I wish we had more information. I wish things were clearer. I wish we had more. I wish that less had been lost to Christianization or just completely lost entirely. I wish we had more, but I'm honestly happy with it being reconstructionist, because we don't have to cling so hard to this is how it was. Like, we
Hmm.
can make guesses and extrapolate from that and build on that with a modern understanding of the world on top of that, versus, as we see, like with Christianity, trying to cling to very old words doesn't always do well for humanity on the whole.
Yeah, well, perfectionism is a big problem in the occult because people tend to go in two ways. They either, and I've been guilty of both at different points in my practice actually, they either go with, I'm going to do things before I'm ready and I'm just going to cut corners, or they never do things because they're trying to be as perfect as possible. They're trying to get every single detail right. They're trying to be like the perfect practitioner. And neither of these approaches are correct. You have to try, but be willing to cut corners and not be perfect. So it's like somewhere in that middle. Find when
Yeah.
people get really fixated on perfection and being like doing the ritual completely properly, having the exact regalia, having the banners be the exact shape, whatever,
Hmm.
whatever the specific ritual requires. They end up like never doing the ritual because they spend so long preparing and they always keep seeing
Yes.
things wrong. And it becomes almost in a weird way a way to spiritually bypass,
Yes.
because
Oh
you're
my God, I'm
using
so
this
glad you said
obsession
that.
with perfection and having things right to not do shit. You're
Hmm.
using it as an excuse to be lazy. And so, in a
Yeah.
weird way, I actually think it's spiritual bypassing. Hot take.
I completely agree. I'm guilty as shit of that. Yeah, just point blank. Yeah, I'm guilty as shit of that. I completely agree. I think people need to learn. I think this was actually one of the points I made that I wanted to talk about was like, in my personal perspective, and this is just my personal opinion, but like, I think a healthy practice in the modern day has to be one part like academic research, whatever, but then the other part definitely has to be like personal gnosis that's not going to make sense to anybody else, because like it is a personal practice, it's your own personal spirituality, and it's very subjective. Just like we said, it's gonna like spirit or deity or whatever the hell you want to call it, it's going to present itself uniquely to each individual person. And so like you have to be willing to like throw away perfectionism, throw away like historical legitimacy, throw away all of that in favor of having a real actual connection to this stuff.
People forget that people in history were just like us. They were actual individual human beings.
And a
And
lot
they're
of them didn't
people.
have any access to like the resources that we do today, like the academic resources.
Yeah, like they were individuals. I think sometimes we sort of we do two things with the past. We either infantilize people of the past and think that they're dumb, primitive people who are like
Yep.
not smart, or we overly venerate them and assume that
Yeah,
they were like these hyper enlightened human beings because they didn't have an iPhone and didn't know what a Starbucks is. People go two
exactly.
ways. Either the past is like golden perfection, or the past people were like shitting in holes and I don't know, didn't know what a running water looked like. I don't know, like people go two ways with it. Both of these ways are wrong. I mean, if we were
Hmm.
living in the past, we would have problems with the what would be the current situation and things we liked about it. Like I think sometimes we need to remember that the past people were not either completely dumb or literal gods. They were just like us. There's not really
Hmm.
a difference. We could have been born back then and we would have been who we are,
Hmm.
But
They
I think
worked
that's
with what
not
they
even an
had.
occult thing. I think that's like a broader when we talk about history thing.
Oh yeah, 100%. It's uniquely relevant here.
No, only the past is good, but also simultaneously stupid. How dare you?
Schrodinger's past.
You're invalidating me, my
Reject
conflicting
tradition,
opinions. Reject
embrace
tradition.
tradition.
Yes.
Reject tradition, embrace modernity.
Yes.
Honestly, this is the real trick about tradition and modernity. This is the real. You guys want the real answer to the tradition modernity debate?
Sure.
There is wisdom in tradition, but there's also some good ideas we have now. So what we should do is syncretize and take the good ideas from the past, take the good ideas from now, and cut the bad things from the past and cut the good things from now and make the ultimate future.
Wait, you're saying we should compromise and evolve?
You
What?
have nuance? Get out. No,
No,
we don't do that here.
yeah, no, we need to. I don't want to return to the past. I don't want to keep it present. I want to merge it. New future, new direction. Let's go forward.
The occult is also very isolating, and I didn't quite know that. I've always known a little bit that even just being an atheist can be a little isolating if you're in very heavily religious communities like I am. My state that I lived in before, and to a certain extent Minnesota as well. Um, it's pretty religious out here, y'all. And so being anything other than Christian can be really isolating, but being an occultist in particular is isolating in part because your religion is very different, very misunderstood, more than most others because at least like even if you're not one branch of Christian but you're another, they understand that your religion is real even if they don't
Hmm.
think it's right. People think it's fake or the stuff that I am interested in others don't want to hear about because they think it's stupid
Hmm.
or I it requires a certain amount of pre-knowledge to be able to talk about it. So in a way I can only talk about certain things with my community because I can't really talk with my atheist or Christian friends about doing spell work or astrology or whatever because they think it's all wooey nonsense even if they are themselves religious. And there's a lot of isolation in the fact that I can't share my ideas without ridicule or sometimes even like hateful mockery or depending on where you are sometimes even violence, and it does kind of suck. Like I love our community, I really do, and I like that we have so many people to be able to interact with, and I like that it got big over COVID to help expand the community. But there is a certain amount where most of that just exists online. You're not going to find those people very easily in real life, and it's if I wanted to make pagan friends in real life, it's really hard.
Oh
Yeah.
my god. People I relate to this hard, especially because like most people don't even know what the word thelema means. It's a
Mhm.
word most people have literally never heard. Some people know about Crowley, especially people who are really into like counterculture stuff or whatever, but most people have no clue. And so, if I want to talk about my religion with people, if someone asks, because I'm not ashamed, we need to have a very long conversation. I can't bring up certain topics. Like, I'm not going to go guns blazing and bring up the Goetia or something. And it
Yeah.
is isolating. I feel a level of isolation because I feel like there's certain things that I can't tell people that are a core part of myself when I first meet them.
Mhm.
And a lot of people in my life who know just think I'm kind of weird, which is fine, but there is a level of loneliness to it and a level of isolation. And I do know people in person who are other occultists, but a lot of my friends, a lot of the people I interact with on a daily basis, they're not occultists. They don't even know what the occult is. If I said the word occult around them, they would probably think I was talking about being a cult member.
Mhm.
Like it is lonely and a lot of people will not understand. A lot of people will judge you. But in the end, the people who really care about you will accept you for who you are. So I guess
Yeah.
in a way it's testing who's really loyal to you.
No, I'm glad you brought that up. That's what I was gonna say too. But especially because, like, for me, I think what was really jarring was like we're talking about like how you can experience like ridicule or violence. Like it can be difficult to like connect with people like within your friend group or your family. But like even beyond that, like it can affect like what types of academic situations you are eligible for. It can affect like what types of careers you're eligible for. Like there are people like you if you get outed at a career, you can be terminated like instantly and ruin your entire life. Like it can affect, like, especially for me early on in life, like it affected what types of relationships I could have, like romantic relationships, because like when you're gay in a small town, there's like three choices, and then like when you're also a witch on top of that, that cuts it down like by more than half. And so like it impacted many different parts of my life and was very isolating for that. But like I said, I'm glad you brought that up, Georgina, because like in a lot of ways, like as much as that is a curse, it's also a blessing, I find, because like you said, you're able to filter out a lot of situations that would otherwise be toxic for you. Because like if someone's too close-minded to like have a 5-minute conversation with you about your spirituality just because it's different, they're going to be very close-minded about a lot of other things as well. And so like through having this kind of extreme filter in my life, I found some of the most incredible, intelligent, kind, open-minded people I've ever met.
Yeah, it's definitely it affects your life. There is some value in being private for that reason because
Yes.
as long as you're private, I mean, it doesn't really do anything. The second you're like me and you're open and your fucking face is attached to it,
That's when shit
things
changes.
changed.
Yep.
Oh
It's
yeah.
it's it's taking on a mark of Cain.
Mm-hmm.
Being
Not
in
in
the
just the metaphorical like we know you like you become Cain or whatever in that metaphorical metaphysical sense. I mean very literally it is a mark of Cain. You're putting on the witch's mark.
Yep.
even in a certain extent the dating scene becomes a little risky
Oh
because
my
let's
god.
say you find somebody who is an occultist. Do they know who you are?
Yep.
Because that comes with other risks. It's a whole thing. So it like being known and a known figure online being like the thing I didn't know would happen to me. As an extension of that, I didn't know that it would in turn affect my dating life in multiple ways, not just does my partner accept my spirituality and my religion and my beliefs and what I do, now what I do for a job, but also if I want to find somebody else, which is now the case, in the further off future.
So my final thoughts are that go into the occult with research prepared, but it's probably not going to go exactly how you expect it to. If you think the occult will be exactly what you think it'll be and you're not going to change, you're wrong. And you're going to change, and you're going to realize that your old opinions were wrong. Your opinions on the occult are going to wildly change, and it should be a ride. Like it's kind of a roller coaster ride, but it's towards attainment and towards gnosis, and it's worth it. Like if you want to get into the occult, I would highly recommend it. But you got to keep an open mind. You got to explore new paradigms, explore new frameworks, expose yourself to different ideas and thoughts, and experiment, and through that you're going to discover your actual path. You can't just pick one because life doesn't exactly work that way. Would be nice if it did, but it doesn't. So you need to be willing to go on that ride and discover your truth. After all, the highest form of religion is truth.
My final thoughts are even if you come in with an open mind, uh, the occult will always surprise you. There will be some twists and turns that you never would expect to have, and it'll blow your mind, and you kind of just have to be okay with that. You have to be okay with the unknown. Not just, let's see where it takes me, but like the wildest shit out of left field. It's going to come at some point. It, things are going to get weird, and you just have to be ready to feel not unstable as in ungrounded, but unstable as in you don't know where you're going.
I think my final thoughts are that humans, we are not stagnant creatures. We are very mutable creatures, and we are constantly growing and changing and shifting, and that includes our opinions and beliefs. And so, especially within occultism, occultism is the art of transmutation. And so, of course, you are going to change as a person. Your opinions and beliefs are going to change very drastically, especially if you pursue occultism. And so, like my co-hosts have said, be ready for that, be prepared for that, embrace that if you can. And on topic of today, not so much regretting, but things we wish we knew early on, don't hold those things against yourself if your opinions change. It is a lot more productive to replace regret with acceptance.
And patrons, we get to thank you if you are a $10 or up tier, so we get to thank you by name. And special thank you to Adrius, Amy, Barry, Evan, Hamda, Janine, Jonah, Lita, Alejandra, Charlotte, Doitsu, Halsey, Jay, Jessica, Lee, Leo, Lilith, Marcelo, Marshall, Mike, MK Scorpio 89, Nauseated, Neon, Nico, Nicole, Ree, the Lady Ghost, Victoria, and that's all of you. Thanks, you guys help us keep the show going.
If you want to support the show, you get your name read off, which is, of course, the most exciting benefit, but you also get extended shows, pre-shows, and video versions, and extra episodes whenever we remember to do them, which should allegedly be around the Sabbats, maybe. I think we're on track this time. If you want to support me, I am Georgina Rose, or .darling, DAAT. I am on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, Patreon, Twitch, Telegram, and I think that's it. Maybe, hopefully. I probably forgot something. I'm on everywhere. I'm literally everywhere you can find me. Not Facebook, though. Facebook is for boomers.
I'm Nike. You can find me at Warrior Witch Nike basically everywhere, including places like Twitch, where I stream with Georgina on Mondays and Tuesdays, and sometimes special guests like I had this past week, which was Ocean Keltoy, who's super cool. But I have a link tree as well if you just want to click that and have easy access to all my shit. I have a website where I do blog posts sometimes. Sometimes.
My name is Anthony. If you want to connect with me, I post stuff on Instagram and Twitter, and that is about it. There's going to come a day very soon when I will dive into TikTok, but we are not there yet. So if you want to find me on Instagram or Twitter, I am at Anthony the Witch. I go by Anthony Wolfe, and we have a good time there.
And this has been Magnolias and Magic.